Did medieval people even have fashion? What bizarre trends did they follow? And how exactly did someone from the 14th century try to catch a crush's eye? Get ready to explore the wild, often surprising world of medieval attraction from the 5th to the 15th century. Number 11. The mighty codpiece. In the late medieval period, as armor evolved and male fashion became increasingly form-fitting, a curious and undeniably bold garment accessory emerged, the codpiece. This wasn't just a practical covering. It was a fashion statement, a deliberate and often exaggerated protrusion designed to draw attention and convey specific messages about the wearer. Think of a man in the 15th century looking to impress. He was not just thinking about the cut of his doublet or the richness of his cloak. He was also considering the powerful visual impact of his codpiece, a piece of clothing that left little to the imagination and was a clear indicator of a certain kind of confidence and social standing. The journey to the codpiece begins with a shift in male attire. Before the 15th century, men often wore long tunics and flowing garments that concealed the legs. However, as the Middle Ages progressed, particularly into the 14th and 15th centuries, doublets became shorter and hose became tighter. These hose, essentially separate leggings, for each leg were attached to the doublet. When men began wearing these close-fitting garments, a gap naturally formed at the crotch area, requiring a piece of cloth to cover it for modesty. It started as a simple triangular or square flap of fabric, quickly morphed into something much more elaborate. By the 15th century, especially during the Renaissance, the codpiece became a distinct padded and often highly decorated element of male attire. It was not merely functional. It was deliberately shaped and often stuffed to create an imposing visual effect. Imagine a young lord or a wealthy merchant stepping into a crowded hall, his legs encased in tightly fitted hose, his doublet tailored to perfection, and his codpiece perhaps made of richly patterned silk or velvet standing out prominently. This was a man making a statement about his presence, his virility, and his readiness for all aspects of life, including securing a desirable partner. The materials used for codpieces varied depending on the wearer's wealth and status. A knight preparing for a tournament might have a leather codpiece integrated into his armor, perhaps embellished with studs or buckles, designed for protection but also for an intimidating appearance. For everyday fashion, especially among the nobility and the burgeoning merchant class, codpieces were crafted from luxurious fabrics like silk, velvet, brocade, or fine wool. They might be padded with horsehair, rags, or even cotton to achieve the desired prominent shape. Some were adorned with embroidery, jewels, or pearls, turning them into miniature works of art. The choice of material and embellishment directly communicated the wearer's wealth and discerning taste. Codpiece made of imported Venetian velvet, shimmering in the torchlight, spoke volumes about the wearer's ability to afford the finest things and his place among the elite. The symbolism of the codpiece was multi-layered. On a basic level, it was an overt display of masculinity and virility. In a society where family lineage and the continuation of a strong bloodline were paramount, a visible sign of a man's potency was a powerful signal. It suggested health, strength, and the capacity for procreation, all highly valued traits in a potential spouse. Chronicles and plays from the period often describe men who embraced the most exaggerated forms of the codpiece as confident and bold figures eager to make their mark on the world and on the opposite sex. The more flamboyant the codpiece, the more audacious the wearer was perceived to be. Furthermore, the codpiece became a symbol of fashionable daring and social standing. Sumptuary laws, which dictated what people could wear based on their social class, often tried to control the extravagance of clothing, including the size and embellishment of codpieces. However, the very existence of these laws suggests that people were pushing boundaries, using fashion to express their individuality and elevate their perceived status. A man who wore a particularly elaborate codpiece might be subtly challenging social norms or proudly asserting his wealth and influence in a way that captured the attention of potential mates and their families. This display of fashionable audacity, especially in the context of controlled sumptuary laws, could signify a man who is not only wealthy, but also daring and perhaps even a bit rebellious, qualities that might be intriguing to some. Depictions in medieval art and literature provide further insight into the codpiece's role in attracting a mate. Portraits of wealthy men and noblemen from the 15th century frequently feature prominent codpieces, often coordinated with the rest of their lavish outfits. These portraits were not just records of appearance. They were statements of status, power, and desirability, often commissioned for family records or as part of marital negotiations. The inclusion of a well-crafted and emphasized codpiece in such a formal representation suggests its importance in presenting a complete, impressive male figure. Poets and satirists of the era also made frequent reference to the codpiece, sometimes humorously, but often acknowledging its role in the social dance of courtship. Character described as having a particularly proud or well-stuffed codpiece was generally understood to be a man of some vigor and standing, someone who would naturally draw favorable attention. The adoption of the codpiece also coincided with a period of changing ideals of masculinity. The knightly ideal of the stoic, chivalrous warrior was gradually giving way to a more flamboyant, often more overtly physical ideal, particularly in the courts of Europe. Codpiece fit perfectly into this new aesthetic, allowing men to project an image of robust strength and an unashamed embrace of their physical attributes. This projection of physical confidence and readiness was undoubtedly a key factor in attracting a mate, as it signaled a man who was capable, assertive, and able to provide and protect. The very act of wearing such a prominent garment required a certain self-assurance, a quality often valued in a partner. Beyond its physical appearance, the codpiece also subtly conveyed an economic message to afford the fine materials, the expert tailoring, and the often elaborate embellishments required to create a truly impressive codpiece. A man had to possess considerable wealth. This was not a garment accessory for the poor. Therefore, seeing a man with a lavish codpiece immediately signaled his economic prosperity, a primary consideration for many medieval families arranging marriages. A potential suitor who could afford such a bold and fashionable display was clearly someone of means, a man capable of supporting a family and maintaining a comfortable household. This economic signal, while not directly related to physical attraction, was inextricably linked to the overall desirability of a partner in medieval society. So, while modern sensibilities might find the codpiece somewhat startling in its time, it was a multifaceted symbol. It was a declaration of virility, a display of wealth, a testament to fashionable daring, and a clear signal of confidence. For a medieval man, choosing the right codpiece and wearing it with aplomb was an important strategy in the complex game of attracting a desirable mate. It was a visual cue, loud and clear, about who he was and what he represented in a society where such signals were read with keen interest. Number 10. The pointed poulaine. Step back into the late medieval street, particularly the 14th and 15th centuries, and one footwear choice would immediately catch the eye: the poulaine, also known as the Krakow. These shoes were not just for walking. They were a profound fashion statement, characterized by their extraordinarily long pointed toes. The length of the point, often extending many inches beyond the foot, was not merely a stylistic flourish. It was a deliberate and extravagant declaration, a clear signal of the wearer's social standing and, by extension, their desirability as a potential mate. This was footwear designed to be noticed, to create a stir, and to convey a message of leisure and elite status in a society that valued both. The origins of the poulaine are debated, but they became immensely popular across Europe, particularly among the nobility and wealthy classes. The name poulaine is thought to derive from Poland, suggesting a possible origin or popularization from that region. Regardless of its exact birthplace, the trend spread rapidly. What began as a moderately pointed toe gradually evolved into an extreme length, some reaching ridiculous proportions, forcing the wearer to walk with a peculiar gait, almost shuffling. This impracticality was precisely the point. Only someone who did not need to engage in manual labor, someone with servants to navigate difficult terrain, could afford to wear such footwear. The construction of a poulaine was a testament to medieval craftsmanship. They were typically made from fine leather or sometimes richer materials, like velvet or silk for indoor wear or ceremonial occasions. The extreme point was often stiffened with baleen, moss, or even wood to maintain its shape. The artisans who crafted these shoes were highly skilled, creating footwear that was both fashionable and, despite its length, surprisingly well fitted around the actual foot. Cost of such specialized craftsmanship combined with the quality of the materials meant that poulaines were not accessible to everyone. Owning multiple pairs, especially those of the most extreme length, was a clear sign of immense wealth. The length of the poulaine's point was directly correlated with social status. Sumptuary laws, those medieval regulations designed to enforce social hierarchy through dress, often explicitly limited the length of the poulaine's toe based on a person's rank. For example, a commoner might be restricted to a point no more than 6 inches long, while a knight might be allowed a foot, and a duke or prince could wear shoes with points extending as far as 2 feet or even more. The longer the toe, the higher the rank, the more undeniable the status. For someone looking to attract a mate, wearing a poulaine of impressive law-abiding length was a clear visual shorthand for their position in society and their potential to offer a life of comfort and influence. This dramatic footwear communicated several things to a potential suitor or their family. First, it loudly proclaimed the wearer's wealth. The materials, the craftsmanship, and the very impracticality of the poulaine all spoke of an individual who did not need to work with their hands, someone who could afford the luxury of clothing that hindered practical movement. This was a direct appeal to the desire for economic security in a marital partner. Second, it signaled social standing and adherence to elite fashion trends. To wear the latest and most exaggerated poulaines showed that the wearer was connected to the upper echelons of society, aware of the prevailing styles, and capable of participating in them. This implied social connections and influence, desirable traits for anyone seeking to elevate their own standing or secure a powerful alliance through marriage. Poulaine also created a distinctive silhouette and gait. The elongated foot made the wearer appear taller and more imposing. The necessary shuffle or carefully controlled walk required by these shoes added an element of grace or, perhaps, an air of aloofness. This was not a shoe for running or strenuous activity. It was a shoe for courtly life, for social gatherings, for making an entrance. A man or woman, though more often men, moving with such deliberate care, perhaps even with a slightly awkward yet fashionable swagger, projected an image of someone who occupied a different sphere, someone who lived a life of leisure and refinement. This graceful, almost theatrical movement, brought about by the shoes, could be seen as an elegant characteristic, drawing favorable attention. Literary and artistic examples from the period confirm the poulaine's significance as a status symbol and a marker of desirability. Chroniclers often described the shoes in great detail when depicting fashionable lords and ladies. Satirical writings sometimes poked fun at the extreme lengths, but even in their mockery, they acknowledged the shoe's prevalence among the fashionable elite. Portraits from the 14th and 15th centuries frequently feature individuals, both men and women, wearing these shoes, often with the point extending prominently, further cementing their association with wealth, status, and the prevailing standards of aristocratic beauty and elegance. A suitor seen wearing the most fashionable and lengthy poulaines was clearly someone to be considered. someone who understood the nuances of high society and possessed the resources to participate fully in it. The very impracticality of the poulaine was part of its allure in attracting a mate. It was a clear demonstration of conspicuous consumption. The wearer was essentially saying, "I am so wealthy, I can afford to wear shoes that make everyday tasks difficult." This overt display of disposable income and leisure time was incredibly attractive in a hierarchical society, where resources dictated survival and comfort. It hinted at a life free from hardship, a promise of a future of ease and luxury for any potential partner. The inability to walk or run efficiently was not a drawback, but a badge of honor, signifying a life of privilege and freedom from manual labor. While men generally adopted the most extreme forms of the poulaine, women also wore pointed shoes, though typically not to the same exaggerated lengths. For both genders, however, the message remained similar. These shoes were for the elite. They were for those who frequented courtly gatherings, participated in dances, and engaged in sophisticated conversations. To be seen in the latest, most extended poulaines was to be seen as someone important, someone connected, and someone who would make a valuable addition to a family through marriage. It was a piece of clothing that directly addressed the practical concerns of wealth and status that underpinned most medieval unions, while also hinting at a sophisticated, fashionable sensibility. In summary, the poulaine was far more than just a shoe. It was a complex signal of wealth, status, and leisure, intricately tied to the rigid social structures of the late medieval period. For a medieval individual looking to attract a mate, donning a pair of impeccably crafted, appropriately long poulaines was a potent, silent declaration of their place in the world, their resources, and their commitment to the prevailing standards of elite fashion, all of which were highly desirable attributes in the quest for a suitable partner. Number 9. The voluminous gown and trailing train. As the High and Late Middle Ages unfolded, particularly from the 13th to the 15th centuries, a fashion trend emerged for women that was both majestic and highly impractical. The voluminous gown with an exceptionally long, trailing train. This was not merely a choice for special occasions. It became a staple of aristocratic and wealthy female attire, deliberately designed to attract a mate by signaling immense wealth, high social status, and an idealized feminine grace. A woman moving through a medieval court, her gown sweeping yards behind her, was making an unforgettable entrance, a powerful statement about her family's prestige and her own eligibility. Prior to this period, earlier medieval female dress was often simpler, with more modest silhouettes. However, as trade flourished and courts became centers of elaborate display, fashion began to reflect this newfound opulence. The desire to visually express wealth and social standing became paramount, and the gown with the train provided the perfect canvas for such an exhibition. These gowns were often made with an incredible amount of fabric, often 3 to 5 times the amount needed for a simple dress, specifically to create the wide skirt and extended train. This lavish use of expensive material was a direct and unmistakable declaration of wealth. The materials themselves were crucial to the gown's impact. For the nobility and very wealthy, these gowns were crafted from imported silks, damasks, velvets, and fine brocades, often richly patterned with threads of gold or silver. The weight and drape of these luxurious fabrics contributed to the gown's impressive volume and the elegant sweep of the train. Dyes were also significant. Vibrant, rare colors like Tyrian purple, rich reds derived from kermes, or deep blues made from woad required costly pigments and complex dyeing processes. A gown made of a shimmering, jewel-toned silk, its train pooling dramatically behind the wearer, was a visual feast, a testament to the family's ability to procure the finest and most expensive goods from across the known world. The sheer impracticality of a long train was a key part of its attractiveness. A woman wearing such a gown could not engage in manual labor, could not easily navigate crowded streets, and certainly could not move quickly or with anything but utmost care. This meant she required attendants to lift and carry her train, especially outdoors or in less pristine environments. Presence of these train bearers, often younger maids or pages, further amplified the wearer's status, indicating a household with ample staff and resources. This visible reliance on others for basic movement subtly broadcasted her family's wealth and their freedom from the necessities of common labor. For a suitor, this signaled a life of luxury and a potential partner who was clearly from a family of means, someone who would not be a burden but an asset in terms of social standing and connections. Furthermore, the voluminous gown and train were a canvas for further embellishment. The hems of the gowns and the edges of the trains were often elaborately embroidered with pearls, precious stones, or intricate goldwork. Sleeves, too, became increasingly wide and flowing, sometimes reaching the floor themselves, adding to the overall sense of dramatic scale and fluid movement. These embellishments further heightened the visual impact and underscored the wearer's wealth and the skill of the artisans employed to create such garments. Every stitch, every bead, every yard of fabric whispered of opulence and exclusivity. The silhouette created by the voluminous gown and train was designed to impress. It created a majestic, almost regal presence. As the woman moved, the train swept and rustled, drawing attention to her and adding a theatrical element to her appearance. This slow, deliberate movement, necessitated by the cumbersome garment, enhanced an aura of grace and dignity. In medieval society, where public appearance was everything, such a dramatic presentation made a woman highly visible and memorable, conveyed an image of power, elegance, and desirability, qualities highly sought after in a potential wife, especially one from a noble family. Accounts from chroniclers and poets of the period often describe the awe and admiration inspired by women dressed in such magnificent gowns. They were depicted as figures of grandeur and beauty, almost otherworldly in their elaborate attire. These descriptions highlight how such fashion choices were not just personal preferences, but were integral to a woman's public presentation and her perceived eligibility. A woman who dressed in such a manner was clearly from a family of standing, a family with whom a desirable alliance could be forged. The gown, therefore, became a physical manifestation of her family's reputation and power, making her a very attractive prospect for marriage. Sumptuary laws, while often attempting to curb extravagance, also serve as evidence of the powerful appeal of these gowns. These laws frequently targeted the length of trains, restricting their use to certain social classes or for specific occasions. The very fact that rulers felt the need to legislate against excessively long trains shows how widespread and desired this fashion was, particularly among those seeking to elevate their status. To wear a train of forbidden length was a subtle act of defiance, a quiet assertion of one's wealth and disregard for restrictive norms, a display of boldness that might also appeal to a certain kind of suitor. In the context of attracting a mate, the voluminous gown and trailing train were thus a multifaceted signal. They unmistakably communicated immense wealth through the sheer quantity and quality of fabric. They signaled high social status through their design and the presence of attendants. They presented an image of grace and elegance, making the wearer a focal point of any gathering. And they subtly, yet clearly, indicated a life of leisure and luxury, free from the burdens of common work. For a medieval family seeking a suitable match for their son, a woman arriving in such a gown was a living, breathing testament to her family's prosperity and standing, making her an extremely appealing prospect in the competitive medieval marriage market. Number 8. Bleached foreheads and plucked hairlines. Traveled back to the late medieval period, particularly the 14th and 15th centuries, and you might notice a striking beauty standard among aristocratic women. An exceptionally high forehead, often achieved through plucking or shaving the hairline, and sometimes even the eyebrows. This was not a natural look for most. It was a deliberate and often painful fashion, choice designed to attract a mate by signaling intelligence, status, and adherence to an elite, idealized aesthetic of beauty. A woman with a smooth, expansive forehead was embracing a sophisticated and intellectual appearance, distinguishing herself from the common folk and positioning herself as a desirable partner in a world that valued wit and breeding. The origins of this trend are rooted in a combination of factors. Prevailing beauty ideals of the time, influenced by literature and art, often favored a long, slender neck and a high, graceful forehead. This was seen as a mark of refinement and aristocratic breeding, contrasting with the more earthy appearance of peasant women. Furthermore, the development of increasingly elaborate headdresses and veils, like the hennin, often required a clear, unobstructed forehead to achieve the desired look. These headdresses, themselves status symbols, were beautifully complemented by the elongated forehead. Achieving this look was a meticulous and continuous process. Women would pluck, shave, or even use depilatory creams to remove hair from their foreheads, sometimes extending back several inches from their natural hairline. Eyebrows might be plucked thin or even entirely removed, sometimes to be drawn back on with a fine brush in a high arched line. This was an active, sustained commitment to a beauty ideal, a clear sign of dedication and leisure, as only women with time and resources could maintain such a demanding routine. A woman who could afford the implements, the time, and perhaps even the painful discomfort of such practices was clearly not burdened by daily chores. A significant indicator of her social standing, the aesthetic message conveyed by a high forehead was multifaceted. It was seen as a sign of intelligence and intellectual prowess. In a period when learning and courtly wit were increasingly valued, especially among the elite, a prominent forehead was subtly associated with a keen mind and an open intellect. This was not just about physical beauty. It was about projecting a sense of mental acuity, a desirable trait for conversation and companionship in a marriage. It also created an illusion of a longer, more elegant facial structure, making the wearer appear more refined and graceful. This elongated face, combined with the often high-necked gowns, contributed to an overall image of aristocratic poise. Moreover, this specific beauty standard was a clear differentiator between the nobility and the common classes. Peasant women, who spent their lives working outdoors, often had sun-darkened skin and natural unplucked hair. The pale, smooth, high forehead was therefore a visual marker of leisure, indoor living, and a privileged existence. It signified that the woman did not toil in the fields, but rather lived a life of comfort and refinement, a life highly sought after by those looking to marry into wealth and status. The contrast was stark and deliberate. A woman with a plucked forehead was literally wearing her social class on her face. Depictions in medieval art, particularly portraits of noble women from the Burgundian court and other European aristocratic centers, vividly illustrate this trend. These paintings often show women with unnaturally high, rounded foreheads, sometimes almost bald at the hairline, emphasizing the severity and elegance of the look. These portraits were commissioned for display, often as part of marriage negotiations, and therefore presented the sitter in the most favorable light, according to the prevailing beauty standards. Prominence of the high forehead in such formal representations pose its importance as a desirable feature for a potential bride. The very act of altering one's natural appearance to this extent also signaled a certain level of commitment to fashion and social presentation. It demonstrated that the woman understood and participated in the elite culture of her time. This cultural fluency was an attractive quality, indicating that she would be a suitable partner in navigating the complexities of courtly life and social interactions. A woman who meticulously maintained such a specific, high-maintenance beauty standard was signaling her dedication to her public image and her role within elite society. While the primary method was plucking, some women also lightened their skin, especially on the forehead, to enhance the pale, smooth effect. Skin-lightening concoctions, sometimes made with less than safe ingredients, were used to achieve an ethereal, almost translucent complexion. This further emphasized the contrast with sun-darkened skin, reinforcing the image of a life spent indoors, away from manual labor, further underscoring wealth and leisure. The combination of a high, pale forehead and often very fair, light hair, whether natural or lightened, was considered the pinnacle of aristocratic beauty. For a medieval man seeking a wife, or for his family evaluating potential brides, a woman with a high, smoothly plucked forehead communicated a clear message. She was part of the elite, understanding and adhering to the sophisticated beauty standards of her class. She was someone whose family had the resources to allow her the leisure to maintain such a demanding appearance. She embodied the prevailing ideals of beauty, grace, and perhaps even intelligence. These were all highly desirable traits that contributed to her overall attractiveness as a potential partner, promising not just a beautiful companion but also a prestigious alliance. Plucked forehead was thus not just a physical characteristic. It was a powerful social and economic signal, integral to a woman's appeal in the medieval marriage market. Number 7. The elaborate hennin. For medieval women, especially those of the nobility in the late 14th and 15th centuries, the hennin was arguably the ultimate statement of fashion, status, and attractiveness. This iconic conical headdress, often incredibly tall and adorned with veils, was not just a piece of headwear, it was a towering declaration of the wearer's position in society and her eligibility as a desirable mate. A woman wearing a magnificent hennin was literally elevated above the crowd, making an unforgettable visual impact that screamed wealth, grace, and refined taste. The hennin emerged from earlier, simpler forms of head coverings and coiffes. As fashion became more elaborate and expressive, particularly in the Burgundian court and across Europe, the desire for increasingly dramatic silhouettes led to the development of these lofty structures. The word hennin itself is likely derived from an old French word meaning to bother or to annoy, perhaps reflecting the perceived impracticality or ostentatiousness by some, yet for those who wore them, they were a mark of utmost style. The most iconic was the tall, conical, or steeple hennin, often made from stiffened linen, buckram, or wire framework, covered with luxurious fabric like silk or velvet. Some hennins could reach astonishing heights, occasionally exceeding a yard, making entry through doorways a challenge. Other forms included the truncated cone, the heart-shaped hennin, or the butterfly hennin, which featured a wire framework resembling spread wings over which sheer veils were draped. Each style was designed to create a specific visual effect, but all shared the common goal of adding significant height and drama to the wearer's silhouette. The materials used for a hennin were a direct reflection of the wearer's wealth. The base structure might be simple, but the outer covering was typically of the finest quality, shimmering silks, rich velvets, or delicate brocades. These fabrics, often imported from far-flung lands, were expensive commodities. The veils, which cascaded from the peak or framework of the hennin, were usually made of fine, sheer linen, silk, gauze, or even the incredibly delicate and costly cypress cloth. These veils, often white or pale, provided a beautiful contrast to the colorful gown below and added an ethereal, almost angelic quality to the wearer. Presence of such delicate, expensive materials was an immediate sign of prosperity and access to luxury goods. The hennin's primary function in attracting a mate was its undeniable declaration of high social status. Sumptuary laws often dictated who could wear such elaborate headwear and what materials or height were permissible. Typically, only noble women and those of the very highest ranks were allowed to wear the tallest and most ornamented hennins. Therefore, seeing a woman in a magnificent hennin was an instant visual confirmation of her aristocratic lineage and her family's esteemed position. For families seeking a marriage alliance, this was a crucial signal, indicating a potential partner who brought not just beauty, but also valuable social connections and prestige. Beyond status, the hennin also contributed to an idealized image of feminine grace and elongation. The height of the hennin made the wearer appear taller and more slender, enhancing an elegant, elongated silhouette that was highly admired. The delicate veil softened the face and neck, creating a sense of ethereal beauty. This overall effect was one of refined poise, almost as if the woman was floating above mundane concerns. This ethereal quality, combined with the visible wealth, was undoubtedly a powerful draw for suitors. The impracticality of the hennin was also a key part of its appeal. A woman wearing a very tall hennin could not engage in common activities or move freely. She had to move with careful deliberation, requiring assistance from attendants. This visible reliance on others underscored her privileged lifestyle and her freedom from manual labor, further signaling her high status and wealth. Only a woman of leisure, one who did not need to perform any form of physical work, could afford to wear such a cumbersome yet beautiful accessory. This was a clear message to any potential suitor about the comfort and luxury her family could provide and what she would bring to a marriage. Artistic representations from the period, particularly portraits and illuminated manuscripts, frequently depict noble women wearing elaborate hennins. These images confirm the widespread adoption of the trend among the elite and its association with beauty, wealth, and status. In paintings commissioned for marriage negotiations, the hennin is often prominently featured, emphasizing the woman's desirability as a high-born bride. Poets and chroniclers of the era also frequently mentioned the hennin when describing beautiful and eligible women, linking the headdress directly to their attractiveness and social standing. The hennin was also often paired with the trend of plucked foreheads, creating a seamless, elongated line from the top of the headdress down to the face. This combination further emphasized the idealized, almost intellectual aesthetic of the time, enhancing the overall impression of sophisticated elegance. The hennin, therefore, was not a standalone fashion statement, but part of a cohesive look designed to maximize visual impact and convey an undeniable message of elite status and desirable qualities. In essence, the hennin was a bold and unequivocal statement of social standing, wealth, and refined beauty in the late medieval period. For a woman looking to attract a mate, donning a magnificent hennin was one of the most powerful visual declarations she could make. It signified her family's prestige, her own elegance, and her access to a life of luxury and leisure. In the intricate dance of medieval courtship and marriage alliances, the hennin played a crucial role in highlighting a woman's eligibility and making her an undeniably attractive prospect. Number 6. Rich furs and jewels. Across the entire medieval period, from the early centuries to the late flourishing of the age, few fashion statements were as universally understood as a clear declaration of wealth and status as the wearing of rich furs and gleaming jewels. These were not mere adornments, they were deliberate, often extravagant displays designed to attract a mate by signaling immense prosperity, power, and high social standing. A man or woman bedecked in the finest furs and sparkling gems was not just dressing warmly or beautifully. They were advertising their worth in a society where economic security and social influence were paramount in the pursuit of a desirable partner. Furs were among the most coveted and expensive materials throughout the Middle Ages. They symbolized warmth, luxury, and prestige. Not all furs were created equal. While commoners might wear coarse sheepskin or rabbit fur, the elite sported exotic and rare pelts from animals like ermine, sable, marten, squirrel, especially vair, a type of squirrel fur, and later lynx and beaver. Ermine, with its pure white winter coat dotted with black tails, was particularly associated with royalty and high nobility, often used to line crowns, robes, and ceremonial garments. The purity and rarity of ermine made it a definitive mark of supreme status. The cost of these furs was astronomical. Acquiring them often involved extensive trade networks spanning vast distances, sometimes reaching into the colder regions of Scandinavia, Russia, or the Near East. The labor involved in trapping, processing, and fashioning these pelts into garments also added significantly to their price. A single cloak lined with sable or ermine could represent the annual income of many common families. Therefore, for a man or woman to appear wearing such furs was an unmistakable visual signal of their family's wealth and their own access to significant resources. This was a direct appeal to potential mates by demonstrating one's ability to live a life of comfort and luxury, and to provide for a family handsomely. Jewels, similarly, were not just decorative. They were portable wealth, investments, and powerful symbols of status. Gold, silver, pearls, and precious stones like rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and later diamonds were highly valued. Jewels were incorporated into clothing, worn as rings, brooches, necklaces, and pendants, and even sewn onto elaborate headdresses or belts. Craftsmanship involved in cutting and setting these stones, though not as advanced as later periods, was still highly skilled and expensive, adding to the overall value of the piece. The symbolism of jewels was multifaceted. Beyond their intrinsic monetary value, certain stones were believed to possess protective or magical properties, adding to their allure. More importantly, they represented connections, power, and inherited wealth. A large, prominent gemstone worn by a lord or lady suggested not only their personal wealth, but also their lineage, perhaps passed down through generations or acquired through significant means. This implied a family with deep roots, strong alliances, and enduring prosperity, all highly attractive attributes for families seeking to secure a beneficial marriage. Sumptuary laws frequently targeted the wearing of furs and jewels. These laws, enacted by rulers across Europe, aimed to control social mobility by restricting who could wear certain types of furs or how many jewels a person could display based on their rank and income. The very existence of these laws demonstrates the power of furs and jewels as social markers. To flaunt such items, especially those pushing the boundaries of what was legally permissible for one's station, was an act of audacious display, subtly declaring one's importance and influence. This kind of confident, even defiant display of wealth could be very attractive to those seeking a partner with ambition and power. Literary and artistic representations from the medieval period consistently depict noble and wealthy individuals adorned with lavish furs and sparkling jewels. Portraits of kings, queens, dukes, and duchesses are rarely seen without these opulent details, touting them in their full splendor. These depictions served as visual propaganda, reinforcing the wearer's power and desirability. Chroniclers and poets often described the attire of characters, particularly when highlighting their beauty, prestige, or eligibility, frequently mentioning the richness of their furs and the brilliance of their gems. A suitor described as having a cloak lined with valuable sable or a ring set with a large ruby was instantly understood to be a man of great means and influence, and thus a highly desirable match. For women, furs and jewels were often integrated into their gowns, headdresses, and belts, emphasizing their status and enhancing their beauty. A jeweled belt could cinch a voluminous gown, drawing attention to a slender waist, while a fur-lined sleeve added warmth and a touch of undeniable luxury. For men, fur-lined cloaks, capes, and hats were common, projecting an image of power and robust masculinity. A man wearing a fur-trimmed houppelande or a jeweled sword belt was clearly a figure of authority and means, someone who could offer protection and prosperity. In a society where marriage was often an economic and social transaction, the visual cues of furs and jewels were direct appeals to the pragmatic considerations of a potential mate and their family. They provided irrefutable evidence of wealth, luxury, and high social standing. These items were not just about personal style. They were about projecting an image of security, comfort, and influence, qualities that were fundamentally attractive in the competitive medieval marriage market. The gleam of a jewel or the luxurious softness of fine fur was a silent yet incredibly potent declaration of eligibility and desirability. Number 5. The padded doublet and broad shoulders. As the late medieval period, particularly the 14th and 15th centuries, saw the rise of more structured and form-fitting male fashion, one innovation stood out as a clear statement of masculine appeal: the padded doublet. This garment, a short, close-fitting jacket, was intentionally constructed with padding in the shoulders and chest, creating an exaggerated, broad-shouldered silhouette. This was not about warmth or modesty. It was a deliberate fashion choice, designed to attract a mate by signaling physical strength, martial prowess, and an imposing masculine figure. A man in a well-tailored padded doublet was projecting an image of power and virility, qualities highly prized in a potential partner. Before the doublet, male attire often consisted of looser tunics and robes. However, with the growing influence of military fashion and the desire for a more athletic appearance, the doublet emerged as a key garment. It evolved from protective, padded underarmor into a standalone fashion item. Its tailored fit at the waist and its broad shoulders created a distinctive V shape, emphasizing the upper body and giving the wearer a formidable presence. This inverted triangle silhouette became synonymous with masculine strength and fashionable elegance. The construction of these padded doublets was quite sophisticated. They were often made from layers of fabric, stitched together, and stuffed with various materials such as cotton, wool, horsehair, or even rags. Padding was concentrated at the shoulders and chest, creating a stiff, architectural shape that dramatically widened the wearer's frame. The sleeves were also often gathered or puffed at the shoulder to further enhance this effect. The outer fabric could range from fine wool to luxurious silks, velvets, or brocades, depending on the wearer's status. The quality of the tailoring and the richness of the fabric directly communicated wealth and attention to detail. The message conveyed by the padded doublet was primarily one of physical capability and strength. In a society where men were often expected to be capable defenders, warriors, or able-bodied leaders, a broad-shouldered physique was seen as a clear indicator of robust health and power. The doublet created the illusion of this ideal physique, regardless of the wearer's actual build. Projected an image of a man ready for action, whether on the battlefield or in the court. This projection of strength and capability was undoubtedly attractive to women and their families, as it suggested a partner who could provide protection, leadership, and contribute to a strong lineage. Furthermore, the padded doublet was associated with a sense of fashionable modernity and courtly elegance. It was the cutting-edge male fashion of its time, worn by knights, noblemen, and wealthy merchants who sought to present themselves as refined yet powerful figures. To wear such a garment indicated that the man was aware of the latest trends and had the means to afford expertly tailored clothing. This attention to personal presentation and adherence to elite style signaled a certain social sophistication, making him an attractive candidate for marriage. It implied he was someone who understood the nuances of courtly life and could navigate them successfully. Depictions in medieval art, particularly portraits of noblemen, kings, and wealthy citizens, frequently showcase men in padded doublets with pronounced shoulders. These portraits often emphasize the imposing silhouette designed to convey power and prestige. Such visual representations were not merely records, they were tools for projecting an image of desirable masculinity. Chroniclers and playwrights of the era also often described male characters in terms of their fashionable attire, noting the impressive lines created by their doublets, linking this style to their appeal and status. A young lord depicted with a particularly broad-shouldered doublet was implicitly understood to be a man of vigor and desirability. The doublet's tight fit at the waist also contributed to its overall effect. By cinching the waist, it exaggerated the broadness of the shoulders, creating an hourglass figure for men that was both powerful and aesthetically pleasing. This sculpted silhouette, combined with tightly fitted hose, allowed men to display their legs and overall physique in a way that was new and highly fashionable. It was a complete package of masculine display, from the broad chest down to the legs, all designed to emphasize physical prowess and fashionable allure. In the context of attracting a mate, the padded doublet was a significant tool. Broadcasted physical strength and martial readiness, qualities highly valued in a protector and provider. It signaled wealth and an understanding of elite fashion, implying social connections and refined taste. It created an imposing and confident presence, projecting an image of a man who was powerful, capable, and at the forefront of contemporary style. For a medieval woman or her family assessing potential suitors, a man who presented himself in such a striking and fashion-forward manner was clearly someone of standing and desirability, making the padded doublet a very effective piece of sartorial seduction. Number 4. Bright colors and sumptuary laws. Throughout the medieval period, from its earliest centuries to its vibrant close, the choice of color in clothing was far from arbitrary. While often seemingly simple, the deliberate wearing of bright, saturated, and costly colors was a powerful fashion statement, subtly but clearly designed to attract a mate. This attraction stemmed not just from aesthetic appeal, but from the profound social and economic messages that certain colors conveyed. A person dressed in dazzling red, deep blue, or brilliant green was not just making a visual splash. They were declaring their wealth, their access to rare resources, and their defiance of, or adherence to, rigid social rules, all of which were highly attractive qualities in the quest for a desirable partner. The cost of dyes in the Middle Ages was immense. Natural pigments for vibrant colors were often rare, difficult to extract, and required complex labor-intensive processes to fix onto fabric. For example, true reds came from kermes, an insect found in Mediterranean regions, or from madder root, which required extensive cultivation. Deep blues often came from woad, or, even more expensively, from indigo imported from distant lands like India. Purples were the most exclusive, derived from murex snails, a process so arduous and costly that Tyrian purple became synonymous with royalty itself. Yellows came from saffron or weld, and greens from various plant materials, often requiring multiple dye baths. The more vivid and stable the color, the more expensive it was. A fabric dyed with a strong permanent color that resisted fading was a clear sign of superior quality and the ability to afford such luxury. Commoners wore undyed wools, muted browns, and natural grays. The vibrant hues were reserved for the elite. Therefore, the simple act of appearing in public in a dress of brilliant scarlet or a tunic of rich sapphire blue immediately signaled the wearer's access to immense wealth and a disregard for the limitations faced by the vast majority of the population. This direct display of prosperity was a fundamental draw for anyone seeking a secure and comfortable life through marriage. Beyond mere cost, color also communicated social standing and adherence to, or defiance of, sumptuary laws. These laws, prevalent across medieval Europe, dictated what colors, fabrics, and styles people of different social classes were permitted to wear. Kings, nobles, and wealthy merchants might be allowed a broader palette and richer shades, while peasants were restricted to muted tones. For instance, sometimes certain shades of purple or gold were entirely reserved for royalty. Wearing a color that was technically above one's station was a daring act of social climbing through fashion. It conveyed a subtle yet powerful message of ambition, influence, or even defiance. This could be incredibly attractive to a potential mate seeking a partner who was not afraid to push boundaries and assert their position. Conversely, wearing colors appropriate to one's high station, but of the utmost quality and brilliance, reinforced one's established prestige and good taste, reassuring a suitor of a proper and advantageous alliance. The psychological impact of bright colors also played a role. In a world often dominated by natural, earthy tones, a person dressed in a vibrant hue would simply stand out. They would catch the eye, drawing attention and making them memorable in a crowd. This visibility was important in the social dance of courtship, making an individual more noticeable and thus more likely to be considered as a potential mate. Bright colors exuded confidence, liveliness, and sometimes even a hint of joyous extravagance, all qualities that could be appealing. Literary and artistic examples from the medieval period frequently associate bright colors with beauty, status, and desirability. Poets describe fair ladies in gowns of sky blue or rose red, linking the vibrancy of their attire to their allure. Illuminated manuscripts show noble figures in richly colored garments, clearly distinguishing them from the more modestly dressed common folk. Portraits of medieval individuals often highlight the brilliant colors of their clothing, emphasizing their wealth and their fashionable sensibilities, qualities that were part of their public presentation for marriage and social standing. For men, a bright tunic or a boldly colored hose could signify youth, vitality, and fashionable daring. A knight might wear his lady's colors in bright livery, a symbolic act of devotion that also caught the eye. For women, a vividly colored gown would highlight their figure, draw attention to their movement, and create an impression of vitality and refined taste. The overall effect was one of confident self-presentation. A person who knew their worth and was not afraid to display it. The very choice of wearing highly visible, expensive colors despite the restrictive sumptuary laws speaks volumes about the desire to attract and impress. Demonstrated that the wearer or their family possessed not only the financial means, but also the social confidence to embrace such a bold aesthetic. In the complex world of medieval courtship, where every visual cue was read and interpreted, bright colors were a potent, undeniable declaration of wealth, status, and desirability, making the wearer a highly attractive prospect for a beneficial union. Number 3. The exaggerated dagged sleep and hem. As the High and Late Middle Ages progressed, particularly into the 14th and 15th centuries, clothing became increasingly elaborate, with a focus on dramatic silhouettes and intricate detailing. One particularly striking and fashionable trend, designed to attract attention and signal the wearer's status, was the use of dagged sleeves and hems. These were not just practical cuts, they were decorative, often fantastical slits and scallops cut into the edges of garments, turning clothing into a flowing, dynamic, and undeniably eye-catching display. A person wearing a garment with exaggerated dagging was projecting an image of fashionable daring, access to skilled craftsmanship, and a delightful disregard for practicality, all highly desirable traits for a potential mate. Dagging refers to the practice of cutting the edges of garments, sleeves, hems, cloaks, hoods, and even hats into elaborate shapes. These shapes could range from simple scallops and leaves to intricate patterns resembling flames, tongues, or even animal forms. This technique was particularly popular on the voluminous outer garments of the period, such as the houppeland for both men and women, or the elaborate sleeves of a man's doublet. As the wearer moved, these dangling strips and cutouts would sway and ripple, creating a dynamic visual effect that was both elegant and theatrical. Practicality of dagging was minimal, and in some cases, it actually made garments less practical. Cut edges could fray easily, especially if the fabric was not of the highest quality, or if the garment was subjected to hard wear. This inherent impracticality was ironically a key part of its appeal in attracting a mate. Only someone who did not need their clothing to endure rough conditions, someone who had other garments for work, and someone who could afford the frequent maintenance or replacement of such delicate items could afford to wear heavily dagged clothing. This was a clear signal of leisure, wealth, and freedom from manual labor, all highly valued attributes in a prospective partner. Craftsmanship involved in creating exaggerated dagging was considerable. It required skilled tailors and designers who could execute intricate patterns with precision. The fabric itself had to be of good quality, often wool or silk, to hold the cut shapes without immediately disintegrating. The cost of such detailed work, added to the expense of the luxurious fabrics, meant that dagged garments were an exclusive fashion. To wear such an item was to demonstrate access to the best artisans and the financial means to afford their labor, signaling a family of resources and refined taste. The aesthetic message of dagging was one of fashionable flair and a certain playful extravagance. It showed that the wearer was not content with simple functional clothing, but embraced the cutting edge of medieval style. It added a layer of visual interest and movement to garments that might otherwise appear somewhat static. For men, dagged sleeves on a houppelande or doublet added to an impressive silhouette, giving a sense of dynamic flow and aristocratic swagger. For women, dagged hemlines and wide flowing sleeves, sometimes themselves dagged, on their gowns added an element of graceful movement and luxurious volume. Sumptuary laws sometimes tried to control the extravagance of dagging, just as they did with other flamboyant fashion trends. These laws might limit the types of cuts, the amount of fabric that could be cut away, or restrict dagging to certain social classes. The very existence of such regulations demonstrates the widespread desire for this style among those aspiring to higher status. To wear dagging, especially in its more elaborate forms, was a subtle act of social assertion demonstrating one's ability to keep up with, or even set, elite fashion trends. This could be very attractive to those seeking a partner who was culturally aware, influential, and not afraid to express their social standing. Literary and artistic examples from the period confirm the popularity and significance of dagging. Illuminated manuscripts and courtly portraits often depict figures, particularly men, wearing houppelans with dramatically dagged sleeves and hems, emphasizing their fashionable status. Poets and chroniclers occasionally describe clothing with notched or slashed edges when discussing the attire of wealthy and desirable individuals, linking the elaborate cuts to their overall appeal. The visual evidence shows that dagging was a defining feature of high fashion during this period, particularly among the younger, more fashion-conscious elite who were most active in the marriage market. The exaggerated dagged sleeve, in particular, became a symbol of courtly elegance and leisurely pursuits. These sleeves were often so long and wide that they had to be tied back or carried by an attendant, further reinforcing the wearer's high social status and freedom from manual labor. The decorative cuts added to the visual interest of these already voluminous sleeves, making them even more striking. This combination of elaborate detailing and impractical luxury was a powerful signal of an individual who lived a life of ease and refinement, a highly desirable prospect for a mate seeking a comfortable and prestigious future. In essence, the exaggerated dagged sleeve and hem were more than just decorative elements. They were a sophisticated language of fashion. They communicated wealth through expensive fabrics and skilled labor. They signaled high status and leisure through their impracticality. And they projected an image of fashionable daring and refined taste. For a medieval individual looking to attract a mate, wearing a garment with elaborate dagging was a clear statement of their place in the elite world, their resources, and their commitment to the cutting edge of style, all of which were highly attractive qualities in the quest for a suitable partner. Number 2. The sleek silhouette and high waist for women. During the High Middle Ages, particularly from the 12th to the early 14th centuries, a distinctive and elegant fashion trend emerged for women. The sleek silhouette, often characterized by a high waistline and long, graceful lines. This was not about voluminous display or overt ornamentation. It was about subtle elegance, emphasizing a refined figure and projecting an image of grace, modesty, and understated beauty. A woman dressed in a gown that flowed smoothly from a high waist was presenting herself as a figure of dignified allure, a desirable quality for a mate seeking a partner who embodied both refinement and propriety. Prior to this period, female fashion could be simpler, sometimes more voluminous, or with waistlines closer to the natural waist. However, as courtly love ideals developed and notions of feminine grace became more refined, the fashion shifted towards a more elongated and slender aesthetic. Kirtle or cotehardie, often worn as an undergarment or as a standalone dress, became the foundation for this silhouette. Key feature was a fitted bodice that subtly shaped the upper body, transitioning into a high waistline positioned just below the bust. From this elevated waist, the skirt flowed downwards in gentle folds, creating a long, unbroken line to the floor. The materials chosen for these gowns were crucial to achieving the sleek effect. Fine wools, linens, and later silks were favored for their ability to drape smoothly and cleanly. Tailoring was precise, allowing the fabric to fall elegantly without excessive bulk. While not always heavily embellished, these gowns could be trimmed with subtle embroidery around the neckline or sleeves, or occasionally cinched with a decorative belt at the high waist. The emphasis was on the quality of the fabric and the skillful cut of the garment, allowing the fabric to speak for itself. The aesthetic message conveyed by the sleek silhouette and high waist was one of refined elegance and a certain demure grace. The long lines made the wearer appear taller and slender, enhancing an ideal of feminine beauty that was ethereal and graceful. The high waist subtly elongated the torso and drew attention to the upper body, while the flowing skirt emphasized movement and an overall sense of fluid beauty. This was a sophisticated look that conveyed a sense of timeless charm rather than fleeting trends. It suggested a woman who was composed, refined, and possessed an innate sense of dignity. Furthermore, this silhouette, while emphasizing the figure, often did so with a sense of modesty. Necklines were typically rounded or square, but not excessively low, and sleeves were long. This balance between elegant shaping and propriety was highly valued in medieval society, especially when seeking a wife. A woman who dressed in such a manner signaled her understanding of appropriate conduct and her adherence to societal expectations for virtuous women. This was a clear appeal to a potential mate, seeking a partner who was not only graceful but also honorable and respectable. The simplicity, or rather the lack of ostentatious display, in this style also conveyed a subtle message of confidence. It suggested that the wearer did not need excessive adornment to attract attention, relying instead on the inherent quality of the garment and the natural elegance of their figure. This understated sophistication could be very attractive, signaling a woman of good taste and innate self-assurance, someone who did not need to try too hard to impress. Depictions in medieval art, especially from the 12th and 13th centuries, frequently showcase women in this sleek, high-waisted style. Illuminated manuscripts, stained glass, and effigies often depict figures with long, flowing gowns that emphasize their height and slender form. These artistic representations cement the association of this silhouette with feminine beauty, grace, and noble status. Poets and troubadours of the era, singing of courtly love, often describe their ladies in terms that align with this elegant aesthetic, emphasizing their graceful figures and flowing attire. While less about overt wealth display than later styles, with voluminous trains, the sleek silhouette still required fine fabrics and skilled tailoring which were not inexpensive. Quality of the wool or linen, the precision of the seams, and the overall drape of the garment spoke of careful construction and a good investment in clothing. This conveyed a subtle message of economic stability and discerning taste, important considerations for a potential mate. In the context of attracting a mate, the sleek silhouette with a high waist was a powerful statement of refined femininity. It communicated grace, elegance, and a dignified presence, signaled an understanding of propriety and a subtle confidence that did not rely on flashy displays. Presented an image of a woman who was naturally beautiful, well-bred and poised, qualities that were deeply attractive to medieval men and their families seeking a partner who would bring honor and respect to their lineage. This style offered a timeless appeal, emphasizing an idealized feminine form in a way that was both attractive and entirely appropriate for a desirable medieval bride. Number 1. Elaborate braids and hairnets. For medieval women, particularly from the 12th through the 14th centuries, hair was often a highly symbolic and carefully managed aspect of personal appearance, serving as a powerful tool to attract a mate. While later periods might feature uncovered flowing hair, for much of the Middle Ages, long, healthy hair was usually worn intricately braided, and then often concealed or partially revealed by elaborate hairnets, known as cauls, or other forms of headwear. This complex styling was not merely for modesty. It was a deliberate statement designed to attract a mate by signaling status, elegance, purity, and the practical virtue of good health and meticulous self-care. A woman with beautifully managed hair, even when partially hidden, was displaying her dedication to refinement and her eligibility as a desirable partner. The ideal of long, abundant hair was universal. Hair was associated with vitality, beauty, and even fertility. However, for married women or those past a certain age, displaying loose hair in public was generally considered immodest. This led to the development of sophisticated ways to contain and display hair simultaneously. Unmarried younger women might wear their braids more openly, but even then intricate styling was preferred. The first step was the braid itself. Long, thick hair was often divided into 2 sections and braided tightly, sometimes with ribbons or false hair woven in to add volume and length. These braids could be incredibly long, reaching to the waist or even beyond, and were a clear indicator of the wearer's good health and youthful vigor. A woman with naturally long and strong hair was seen as being in prime physical condition, a highly attractive trait for a potential mate seeking to ensure a strong lineage. Time and effort required to maintain such long hair and to braid it daily also signaled a woman of leisure, one who had servants or ample personal time to dedicate to her appearance. Once braided, the hair was then often wrapped around the head, sometimes over the ears, forming coils or loops. Over this, a hairnet or caul would be worn. These cauls were not simple nets. They were often elaborate, decorative creations made from silk threads, fine linen, or even gold or silver wire. Some were woven with pearls, beads, or small jewels, turning them into intricate pieces of headwear art. These cauls would often frame the face beautifully, allowing glimpses of the braided hair beneath, hinting at its length and thickness without overtly displaying it. The aesthetic message conveyed by these elaborate braids and hairnets was one of elegance, order, and refined beauty. The neatness and complexity of the braiding, combined with the often luxurious cauls, presented an image of a woman who was meticulous, well-groomed, and attentive to detail. This spoke to a certain level of self-respect and disciplined beauty, qualities that would be desirable in a partner managing a household or representing a family in public. The subtle reveal of hair through the net added an element of allure, suggesting hidden beauty and a sense of tantalizing modesty. Furthermore, the materials and craftsmanship of the cauls clearly communicated status and wealth. The hairnet, woven with gold thread and adorned with pearls, was an unmistakable sign of immense prosperity. Such items were expensive to produce, requiring skilled artisans and costly materials. For a woman to wear such a piece was to demonstrate her family's wealth and their ability to procure the finest accessories. This direct display of economic well-being was a fundamental draw for families seeking a financially advantageous marriage. Practice also subtly signaled a woman's adherence to societal norms of modesty and virtue, particularly for married or mature women. By containing her hair, she demonstrated her respect for social conventions and her commitment to a reputable image. This was a crucial factor for a medieval suitor or his family, who valued a partner's perceived purity and moral standing highly. A woman who skillfully balanced modesty with elegance through her hair styling was seen as embodying the ideal feminine virtues. Artistic representations from the medieval period, including illuminated manuscripts, paintings, and sculptures, frequently depict women with their hair meticulously braided and often encased in decorative cauls or other forms of headwear. These images, often of noble women or figures representing ideals of beauty, demonstrate the widespread adoption and desirability of this hair fashion. The elaborate detail in the depictions of these heralds confirms their importance as a significant element of a woman's overall presentation. Chroniclers and poets also sometimes describe the intricate hairstyles of beautiful and eligible women, linking the care and artistry involved to their attractiveness and social standing. The combined effect of long, healthy braids and decorative hairnets was a powerful statement for a medieval woman seeking a mate. It showcased her good health and vitality, desirable for childbearing and family continuation. It demonstrated her family's wealth through the costly materials and craftsmanship of her hair accessories, projected an image of refined elegance, meticulousness, and a virtuous adherence to social norms. For a medieval man or his family, a woman who presented herself with such care and sophistication was clearly a desirable prospect, promising both beauty and a suitable alliance that would bring honor and prosperity. The elaborate braid and hairnet, therefore, was a nuanced but undeniably effective fashion statement in the complex dance of medieval courtship.